Thank you so much for coming out here. We're going to have a good session today. I have a good conversation. It's always nice to be able to come down here and celebrate history. You know, I was actually with these young folks yesterday who were about to perform, and I was making a statement that while we celebrate the fact that black history exists in this country and all over this world, black history also exists right here in St. Paul, if you understand what I mean. We have some phenomenal people in our community, some in this very room, who have made incredible contributions to the struggle for human rights for all people. We're doing a lot of things, I think, at the city as well to do that very directly. And so I look forward to celebrating this day and all days, the City of St. Paul's commitment not only to celebrating African American History Month, Asian American History Month, and the different months as they come along throughout the year, but really year-round, not just looking backwards, but you look backwards so that you know where you're going in the future. And so heading forward in a direction that understands that you have to know your past to keep from repeating it. Amen? Amen. All right. Without further, that's a tradition we have in the African American community. Without any further ado, I really want to introduce a friend of mine, a lifelong friend of mine, really, Mr. Damone Presley. They've been working together on this points of entry players, and they've been focused on celebrating African American history in the sort of recent African American history, in the local recent African American history. Damone is youth director at Aurora St. Anthony Neighborhood Development Corporation. He runs the youth leadership program there, and he's with the Points of Entry Players, who will perform the experience and history of the Rondo elders who once lived in the old Rondo neighborhood. Come on, give him a round of applause.
Thank you, Melvin, for saying I'm a youngster.
I didn't say youngster.
I think I fit right in, don't I? It's a pleasure, first and foremost, to be down here today, and very grateful. It's a humble experience to share the spirit of Rondo with you all. Born and raised here in St. Paul, Minnesota. Grew up in Rondo all my life. So I'm a lifelong resident, so this is very important to me to participate on this journey with these young leaders who are embarking on some history to share to the community. So, as Melvin said, we are the Points of Entry Players, and also the program Vision and Living Life. Change is possible. That it's a Building Healthy Lifestyle program that I founded in 2003. It works with youth from the age of 12 to 21. And these are several of our leadership members who are participating in the spirit of Rondo. They embarked on a journey early in June where they started out reading on some of the history of our elders here in the Rondo community. From that, they had chose several elders that they kind of like connected with, that they were willing to do some studying, learn about their upbringing, learn about the impact that the community has had with them, on them, that they are here today to present that. I'd also like to thank Aurora St. Anthony Neighborhood Development Corporation Youth Count Program, along with the Council on Black Minnesotans and the Legacy Funds, by way that the Points of Entry Players are now in existence. So I would like to say gratitude to the Council on Black Minnesotans. So we are here today, and the Points of Entry Players, we have Jeff on the end, we have Quentin next to him, we have Dante, Henry, we have Paris, we have Maya, and we have Deanna. And I, as Melvin said, am Damone Presley. All right. As the Black poet J.R. Saunders said, the history between a relationship and its people is just as important as a relationship between a child and its mother. History not only tells us who we are or what we are, history also informs us what we still must be and what we still can do. Looking back, moving forward, I am my brother's keeper.
I am a musician, never brought into submission, connecting jobs like a line. Black people come, that's a sign of Rondo stars. I was one of the starters. I am Melvin Carter.
I am my brother's keeper. I am Melvin Whitfield Carter Sr. My first remembrance of the Rondo community was everything horse and buggy. I remember the milk cars and the things being pulled by horses. And it was very smoky. Everybody burned coal. During those days, I did a lot of piecing work. I pieced all jobs together like a quilt, to make some time as a musician and to support my family. One of the jobs I pieced together was my work on the railroad. I was a red cat porter. Trains and packing houses were the kind of jobs you could get just walking in. And I tried to go to school at the same time, but that didn't work too well with raising a family. Looking back,
moving forward, I am my brother's keeper.
Houses getting torn down. Grandfather ran a frown, ripping pieces from Black Crown just because our skin was brown. Now it came down to my house. My voice was small like a mouse. Flame of sadness too big to douse.
I am my brother's keeper. I am Nathaniel Abdul Khalik, formerly Nathaniel Raymond Davis. I was born and raised at 304 Rondo. Melvin Carter Sr., they lived across the street from us. As they started one by one knocking down these houses, this cocoon that many of us have been blessed to be a part of started falling apart. One minute, we're living in this community where there's Black businesses, people getting along, and everything's just wonderful. You can sleep on the porch. Then all of a sudden, you're losing this family and you're losing that family. It was like they dropped a bomb and pieced the cocoon and scattering all over, never to be put back together. Looking back,
moving forward, I am my brother's keeper. Looking back, moving forward, I am my brother's keeper.
I am Debbie Gilbreth Montgomery. I grew up at 978 St. Anthony. I was 17 years old and I was on a mission. When I was 17, I was elected to the National Board of Directors for NAACP. I wanted to help the next generation move up. I was kind of blessed. I marched from Selma to Montgomery with Dr. King, and I was in the march on Washington when he gave that "I Have a Dream" speech. People were standing around, and people were standing around, 250,000 people, and they were listening to this guy talk. It was just phenomenal. You get a rush and think, hey, we've got to stand up for our rights. It was just phenomenal.
Looking back, moving forward, I am my brother's keeper.
Raise up your Black fist. We can give Black this. Life to Rondo community as a sign of unity. Together as a unit, we can remember the past and move forward from last. No lower or upper class. We can get together and make them understand, rising up from the sand. Speaking as one voice, saying, this is our land.
That's a powerful piece, isn't it? I love that piece. For those of you who are wondering how old I really am, they were talking about my grandfather. Just to be clear. I am pleased. Thank you guys so much. We really appreciate you guys being here. Give them one more round of applause. And to be clear, I said Damone was with young people. I didn't say he was young people.
I like to be young, so
I'm just kidding. Without further ado, I'd really like to introduce our speaker for today, and it's Dr. Whitney Stewart-Harris, who is the Executive Director of Diversity and Multiculturalism for the Minnesota State College and University System. Dr. Stewart-Harris is Executive Director of the organization of the Diversity and Multiculturalism Division in the Office of the Chancellor of the Minnesota State Colleges and University System. His research interests include African American men and masculinities, Black gay masculinities of the Harlem Renaissance, and African American masculinities and educational institutions. Harris has also served as an expert witness for the defense in capital murder cases. Dr. Harris's affiliations include memberships in the American Association for Affirmative Action, Phi Kappa Phi Honor Society, and National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and the Southern Poverty Law Center. Dr. Harris holds degrees in education, psychology, and theology with a doctorate in educational foundations and administration. His most recent publication is entitled What's Up with the Brothers? Essays and Studies on African American Masculinities, edited with Ronald Ferguson. Without further ado, Dr. Whitney Stewart-Harris.
Well, son, I tell you, life for me ain't been no crystal stairs.
That's right.
It's a taxi and splendors and boards torn up and places with no carpet on the floor. Bad. But all the time I've been a climbing on and reaching landings and turning corners and sometimes going in the dark where there ain't been no light. So boy, don't you turn back. Don't you sit down on the steps, because you find it's kind of hard. Don't you fall down now. For I still going, honey. I still climbing. And life for me ain't been no crystal stairs. I am just so happy to be here with you. It is a wonderful opportunity to be with City Councilman Carter. I think I met his mother before him, and he's just as good. And so it's really good to be here. It's really good to be here with you to share just a few moments, and I've told that I just have a few moments because some of you have to at least create the illusion that you're going back to work, so I want you to have time to do that. So I want to thank you for having this, providing me with this occasion. And I just called, just before I came in, I was calling the office of my boss, Chancellor Rosenstone, and I got out by saying, I'm going to tell him what a great new boss you are. So he sends his regards and certainly wants you to know of our commitment to education. And again, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Rita's Fletcher. Rita's was one of the first persons I met when I moved to Minnesota some almost 7 years ago. Why I moved to Minnesota from Louisiana remains one of those mysteries. Actually, I came from Michigan, but I am from Louisiana. He has served on the St. Paul College Advisory Board for many years. He's been a member of our Community Action Diversity Board, which is a board that advises my office that looks after education in diversity for all of our 32 institutions. And I also want to thank him for inviting me. I want to thank him for buying a copy of my latest book, despite his whining about how much it cost. And I also would like to thank all of you, and in particular Miss Henderson and Nate, who worked to help get me here. And I did what I always do. They were trying to get me a parking ticket. Now my mother would have told me, a parking pass. Now my mother would have told me I should have told them as soon as they offered that I just lived down the street and I could walk. I just work right at the Wells Fargo building. I couldn't do that. I had to let them really work at getting me here. And then at the end, I told them I'm just going to walk over. But I had to let them. I just couldn't believe where Wells Fargo building was in this building. So I want to talk a little bit. I want to talk about history, and I'm going to talk about it from the perspective of my own experience as I received it from my father as an African-American male. But before I do that, I want to just mention I did not grow up in Rondo, but every Sunday finds me in Rondo because I'm a member of St. Peter Claver Catholic Church. So yes, I'm often in the Rondo neighborhood. And just before I leave that, I want to tell you something. There are only 1 million African American Catholics in the United States. And 50 years ago, there were less than 600,000. I'm going somewhere with this, just walk with me. And there was a person who called a conference, the first ever conference of African American Catholics. And that person was a Mr. McGee from St. Paul. There only were 10 black Catholics. No. So that's the miracle. If you ever think that one person could make, there were no black priests, there were no black nuns, and this one man. Now, for those of you who are different religions, I'm not trying to convert you. I'm trying to talk about how one person can make a difference, how one brother made a difference. That conference still meets every 2 years today. So one person, I've forgotten his first name, Mr. McGee from the Rondo neighborhood, who you always have to learn about when you do catechism in black Catholic churches, because you have to learn his name. You also, in sociology, have to learn the name of a Mr. Billy Williams. Well, I was at a celebration where Mr. Billy Williams received an honor, a national honor. You know why? God, man, you know why? Because Mr. Billy Williams worked for the governors. He worked for 7 governors over at the Capitol. He is credited with Minnesota being one of the very few states who never had a law that interdicted marriage between blacks and whites. Because on a walk with the governor, he said, this is historical. I was at the NAACP conference when he got an award. I was young and much better looking, but and so he had convinced the governor, I don't know the details, but look in that book about history of black Minnesotans. And because he was able to talk to because he had access, he was able to keep Minnesota from having that negative history as part of his story, because he argued with the governor, or told the governor. So I always say that because I'm going somewhere there. Brothers get these bad names, Councilman Carter, and yet my theme today is that brothers everywhere are doing lots of great things. Brothers everywhere. 90% of the brothers in this country are doing what they ought to do with whatever it is they got. My father was one of those. You see, I am my own cause and my own effect. I've been around for centuries, and you don't know me yet. That's the story of many brothers. Now, there are other groups I could be talking about. If it was the Hispanic celebration, I'd be talking about that. But it happens to be Black History Month, so that's what I'm talking. If it was poor white males, I could talk about. They have a story that they could tell for always being assumed to be privileged when they're not. But that's for another day. So I'm talking about the brothers today. So I am the son of a black brother that I write about in my book, who did what he could with what he had, like most African American males. And I think that we forget not to operate out of a deficit model when we deal with African American males. We assume that African American males are all what we see on TV. All what we see on TV. And we assume that even when we don't assume it, if you will. You can probably guess what my grandfather used to do for a living, right? I grew up in the house with my grandfather. Can you guess already what he used to do by the way I talk? We assume, we make all kinds of assumptions. And what I want to suggest is those assumptions play out in many different ways. They play out in who gets employed, they play out in promotions, they play out in marriages, they play out in families, they play out in school. The group with the lowest graduation rate in the Twin Cities is African American males. And I would argue that a great deal of that is due to our perceptions, our sense of what they can and cannot do. What they can and cannot do. So when my father saw this one, he said, I'm naming this one. So he pondered long and hard. And if you think the name he laid on me was Rastas, or Dopey, or Gangbanger, or Cut Eye, you're wrong. You're wrong. I am a proud, almost arrogant black male. because I stand on the shoulders of my father, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I begin this exploration of the movement of the brothers from the margins to empowerment by asking you a simple question. If I were to ask you to write down 10 words, the first 10 words that come to your mind when you think of black males, I could bet my next check that I owe to Citibank Housing Authority that at least 80% of those words would be negative. At least 80%. I've done it all over the country, and it always comes up that way. At least 80% of the words would be negative. Now, I want to suggest that when we do that, it is not just African American males who suffer, it's our community who suffer. Because we move that from writing words to the paper to how we see and live in the community. So it's not just an academic exercise, if you will. It can impact everything from health care to how I'm treated at work. And I'm treated well, because at this point in my life, I can retire any day, so I ain't having it. You know where I'm coming from? I ain't having it, but the best way. You ain't gonna treat me but the best way, you know, because I don't have to have it any other way. So it does, and so what we do when we do those negative stereotypes is we limit the brother's contribution to society. We not only limit them. Now let me get that, because I know some people throwing me dark eyes. They got crazy brothers out there. I'm not trying to gloss over that at all. In fact, just yesterday there was a crazy brother in the sidewalk who had his honeys by the neck, a little brother, and I had to have church with it. And tell him he better be glad that wasn't my mama. Because it'd be all over, huh? By the way, it was his own insecurities, his own inability, what we've done. He has responsibility for it, but we own some of that too. We own some of that too. And so we have to hold on to something. We can't pass that all off on the child, because children do what we parents do, let them do. Just tell you a quick story about my dad. Worked on the railroad, Missouri, yes. Worked on the Missouri Pacific Railroad. He was a porter and a brakeman. And by the way, I don't hear it often, but Rondo was what Rondo was. Somebody say amen. Amen. Because there were a lot of porters in Rondo. And porters had, which is what my father had. My father was a porter, and he was an auto mechanic. He was a trained auto mechanic. He was the first one in my hometown to go away to Detroit to a school that later became a technical school to learn how to work on automatic transmissions. But he could not get a loan to start his own repair shop. So he put together a repair shop, and he refused to work for anyone else. So he worked on the railroad because my mother said we had to have health insurance. So he was a smart man. He figured out just how many days he had to work on the railroad to keep his seniority. And the rest of the days he worked in an auto repair shop. And so he made the car companies bring their cars to him rather than him work for the car companies. I remind my boss of that every once in a while when things, no. Now I stand in another tradition, huh? So my father was never able to we lived on the family place. So he was able to build a repair shop on the family place. But I'm going somewhere with this. Just as so many of our young people today, and he did well, by the way, so this is not a Poor Willie story. This is about how we need to be aware of what our images are. Because in many ways, now don't throw nothing in, but in many ways, despite the number of degrees I have, let me just tell you a story. My spouse happens to be white male, and I'm an African-American male. When we moved here to look for houses, now he's a school teacher. He got maybe a degree and a half. Don't tell him I said that. I got at least 5 and I think 6. I say that for a reason. The realtors never spoke to me. I'm not making this up. This is not 1960. I didn't notice it, because why? Because I'm accustomed to it. Who pointed it out to me? Am I making it? So when we say African American males are angry, we need to own part of that. Fortunately, I wasn't interested. I'd rather read a book than buy a house, and I'm serious. You know that. Go get one and tell me when you're ready. You know, I'm not interested if it has 2 bedrooms or 1 bedroom or walk out or walk in. You know, that stuff doesn't interest me. But this, by the way, I moved to Minnesota 7 years ago. I'm not telling a 1960 story. So when we evaluate, no, I'm not angry, by the way. I'm not angry. I'm just trying to teach us. I'm just trying to teach us. Just trying to get us to know how we sometimes get craziness in people and how we sometimes reinforce that craziness by not being aware. And I was not dressed badly. I was dressed much better. I mean, that's the culture. And when I go look for a house, I was clean, you know. So somebody know what I'm talking about, huh? So I was going to do business, so I looked like I was. And he had on some kind of, I would say white boy's jeans, but that's racist. He had on some kind of jeans, you know. He wasn't looking as clean as I was, you know. So I was. Macy's dress. But anyway, so let me just go on. So when we look at issues that impact our males today, what I should have done was said, my name is man, lusty, bad, and loud. But then I would have been an angry young male. But he ain't had no money. I don't mean that as a put down. I'm trying to make a point here, you know. So those are the kinds of things that we have to be aware of. By the way, I'm just talking about black males, but we do that to people who don't look like us all the time. Huh? No matter how we look, what we look like, we do that to people who don't look like us all the time, which is the message. No matter how we look, you know, what our race is, the tendency to treat other people as other is what we have to work with as we work with African American. By the way, my father was an auto mechanic, not a technician. A technician would have been not macho enough for him. We used to my brother later taught auto mechanics, and he would tell my dad he was an auto technician, and my dad would say, I'm an auto mechanic boy. So he had a different take on it. I want to suggest that as we think about African American males, we begin to think about them in a new way. Let me give you a test. How many of you have heard the expression, there are more black males in jail than in college? Anybody heard that? That is absolutely false. Let me tell you why. The only way you can get to that number is to count African American males in jail from 0 to 100. People 99 don't go to college. If you choose 18 to 26, there are more African American males in college than in jail. Somebody say amen. I know you don't want to say it because it makes you uncomfortable to hear the truth. Huh? So I would say that's a strategic disinformation. Huh? Now, do we have enough African American males in the college? No. So I'm not trying to dismiss that. We need to have far more African American. That's not the problem. But the point is, what kind of pictures are we painting out there, and what kind of messages are we sending? That's just I would give a student an F on a paper who turned in that kind of statistical work. You know, it's just. It's like saying everybody who drink milk go to the bathroom. You know, it's a nothing statement. You know. I mean, I can make it look pretty and put a quotation around it and give it a footnote, but it's a nothing statement. You know, it doesn't help us understand what the situation is. So that's one of the things that I think that we have to talk about and think about. Again, let me be honest here, because I don't want to. actually I don't care if you get mad, but I don't want to give you biased information. I'm not saying all African Americans are doing well. I'm saying maybe if we look at it differently, we could help more of them do better. Does that make sense? Yeah. You see what I'm saying? So maybe if we heard the message, so you can't tell me that a teacher who hears that, and I'm one for 38 years. I look 35, but I'm almost 60. So those kinds of stereotypes have a way of just seeping into your body and your brain without even you being aware of them. Just this morning, my best friend died. I mentioned to somebody, and I called home. And when I call home, I always speak in French, and I also sometimes talk to myself. And so I was on the elevator repeating some stuff in French, and the person on the elevator gave me the look of, he must be ignorant. You know that look? You know that look? And that's all those stereotypes that we overlay. And I can name where that came from, but I don't have time because I got to shut up in a minute. But anyway, what I'm trying to suggest to us is that as we look at African American men, as we think historically about African American men, let's take the Porter story. There are many, many African American males my age who can thank Porters for getting them through college. Now, I won't give you his name because I don't have permission, but one of the most famous African American educators in the state of Minnesota was a Porter boy. Now, that's not a derogatory term. That's see, sometimes we throw away words too quick. That's a really strong, positive word, because those Porters this is history that we need to know about how African American men took care of that community. They would take those boys on the run and get them to the colleges down south. And in the summer, they took them back on the run and let them make money. And they looked after, they taught them a few bad habits, but they looked after them pretty good. And we had some of those, we had rent houses. And every summer, my dad would get some of those guys who were going to Grambling and Southern and Dillard and Xavier, and they would come and stay and work for us in the summertime. But they made money to go to college. But I'm trying to get the guy to tell that story, but sometimes we get embarrassed about our past. But I think it's a wonderful story to have been a Porter boy. I think it's a wonderful story, because they took nothing and got black men through college. I think that's worth celebrating. Amen? I think that's worth celebrating. I don't think you ought to be embarrassed about that. So Minnesota has the Porters in Minnesota, if you start writing the men across the country who have their education because of them, somebody say long list, huh? You would have a long, long list. That's history. That's not story. That's true history. So when we think about the role that African American men have played, we have to be aware of that. All the stories that they've done. Now, the other thing my father taught me, and you probably noticed a little arrogance, because my father was very proud of being first a colored, then a Negro. And my father was killed in 1968, so he didn't quite make it to black. but he was a very proud man. You think I could tell them the story and they won't get mad? You know the famous story? Yeah. The sawmill story? Yeah. My father was quite a character. He was smart, but he was look up when you go home, Google rambling man, and you'll get a sense of what like I got brothers my same age, but we shared several mothers. You know what I mean? He was I'm not holding that up as a model. I'm just telling history. You know what I'm talking about? There were advantages to being a Porter, but that's for another day. So I'm not holding that up as a model. But I believe the truth is the truth. Huh? And my brother Joseph, who I share a different mother with, he's just as glad to be here as I am. So let's go on with the story. But anyway, my father would often get in financial trouble because my mother controlled the money from the auto shop. We called it the garage. She controlled the money the community knew that I'd have got that money. And so my father would often get in trouble. So he would sometimes go work at the sawmill. It was called a sawmill. And the sawmill man who ran the sawmill was known for, he would occasionally beat his black workers or hit them, you know, or something like that. So my father borrowed some money from him. And morally, he should have paid it back. Let me get that out the way. But if you knew my dad, you were going. You better put a lot of interest on it because it was going to be a long time before you got it back. and so I'm not trying to pay him back. And morally, he should have paid the money back. But you know, he had some kind of apartments down there to take care of. You know? In Louisiana, they have what they call shotgun homes. If you ever been there, he had a few of those shotgun homes where he had some investments. And so this man, Mr. Penton was his name. His granddaughter and I later went to college together, and she remembered the story too. And so my father borrowed the money, wouldn't give him the money back, and so all of the men knew that my dad wasn't going to give the man the money back, and you had to go get your check, so they could explain why you didn't get all your money because you owed so you had to go get your check. And the men still tell this story that all the brothers knew that Mr. Penton put out that he was going to beat my dad if he didn't give him his money back. And so all the brothers showed up because they knew it was on. They knew it was on. And I won't go into detail, but the end of the story is the man did not beat my father, as you probably guess. Nor did he get his money until my mother gave him the money later on. But the men talk about that. They all agree he should have paid the money back, but they talk about it from the sense of my father's sense of dignity. Now, it's a crippled and broken dignity. Sure, I'm going to admit it up front, but he was not about to let a white male beat him up. He was the first one to stand up against him. And then so that gave me dignity. Now, I'm not painting him as a good picture, right? I'm telling you the whole story, right? Another story, a friend and I went to the library, and they would not let us go through the stacks because it was a new librarian. And you had to tell them what you want. Well, you can't tell them what you want when you're 10 years old because you don't know what you want, right? You got, and my father, one of my stories I remember, my father, do any of you know what a tie tool is? Not those little flimsy things you get in the back of your car. A tie tool is something that it's what you change the tire on the car with. But it's not the ones you get in a new car. It was a long iron rod that had a sharp end on one and a little, you know what I'm talking about? And it was hard. And my dad took us in the library and stood at the place and said, I pay more taxes than most white folk in this town. That integrated the library. So I learned some dignity, by the way, in all fairness, the white librarian was so happy that the library was integrated. Yeah, so I like to tell the whole story. You know, she was just waiting for the moment, if you will, that somebody would dare. And she was from Minnesota. So we became friends later, and my family established a scholarship in her name. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make as we talk about it, and I want to make three important points. And then I'm going to sit down. However we treat any segment of our society determines the goodness of our society. We can't we can't attribute all kinds of negative stereotypes to African American males. First, we can't do it if we know the history. If we know that those porters who were being treated as boys often could look beyond that and reach back, somebody say amen if you know what I'm talking about, amen. Reach back and pull up another young male with them. I think that's something to celebrate. I think that's a story that and that's not fiction. That's not just in Minnesota. That's all across the country. That's all across the country. In fact, I told the president of DCTC, which has a conductors training program, we really ought to put something out there that celebrates the porters from Rondo. because they said that we're not getting many black students in this program. And so I said, well, why don't we do a mural of the porters and see if we can't make people feel welcome. Welcome in the DCTT is Dakota Community Technical College, where they have one of the best conductor programs in the country, but not too many of us in it. And so I was trying to talk about how sometimes it's not programs, it's attitude and atmosphere that makes the difference, you know. So sometimes it's not running to recruit, but changing the atmosphere of the place that makes the difference, that makes it feel welcome. So I think we have to realize however we treat any segment, in this case we talk about African American males, impact how the whole community reacts. The second thing I want to remember is we really do need to break out. We need to say, this African American male did something bad, not African American males. Because 90% of the African American males in this country are doing the best that they can with what they have. And when you see that, if a teacher understands that, you can't tell me he or she won't teach differently. Huh? If an employer who's interviewing, if they understand that, they gotta interview differently, and they gotta think differently about how they're hired, and they gotta question their stereotypes about Africa. You know, that stereotype, and if you think that stereotype is not true, every once in a while I do an experiment. Don't tell them back in the office. But I am quite an imp. When I come home from school, I used to get a paper report card. When I came home from school, the only grade my mother looked at was my conduct grade. She figured, I was quite an imp. She figured if the conduct grade was okay, I was okay. You know, I was gonna be okay. And so sometimes when I get in the elevator in the parking garage over there, and I'm also a psychologist, so I do a test. If it's me and a certain member of our society, and I'm still dressed cool, I get my gangster leave. And the purse gets closer. Even though I'm dressed, I'm not making it up, folks. You try it. Even though I'm dressed, clearly, I'm gonna be nasty here. Clearly, I could buy her purse and probably her car too. But anyway, but I'm trying to make a point here. You know where I'm going? And that's not a bad person who's doing it. That's a person who's laden down with a stereotype. You know the difference I'm trying to make? So that's not a bad person. Because listen to me, most white females in this country overwhelmingly have not been robbed by a black person. Overwhelmingly, the majority have not. But that stereotype hangs in the air. And what I would argue, now walk with me here, what I would argue is we bring our elevator stuff with us to our office stuff, where we make decision stuff. Somebody walking with me? So that's why it's so important to get in touch with, about any group. Again, I could do this for any of our social groups, whether it's immigrants, the poor immigrants. We have all kinds of, in this country, we assume immigrants can't speak English. In fact, if I start speaking French in the office, they say, where were you born? I say, Louisiana. They say, KB. Now that's because they don't know some history, but also it's because they assume if you speak a foreign language, you're foreign. That's all part of the stuff we need to chip down, all part of stuff we need to break down. Now, they're giving me the sign, my time is up, but I hope that, I didn't want to shock you and I don't want to beat you up, but I want to call us all to get in touch with our stereotypes. Here we're talking about African American males, but one of the things I catch myself doing is getting in touch with my own stereotypes. Every once in a while I'll say or do something, and my partner will say, Mr. Diversity. You get it? Yeah. You know, so we all struggle with those. So the thing is not to act like we don't know them or we don't have them, but to own them. To take a look in our backpack
and own them and dig them out and look them in the face and see how they are impacting how we treat others, how we make decisions, I just looked at the human rights person, what kind of decisions we make around vendors. And it's real stuff, huh? It's real stuff. You know, I was at a university once and I said, why don't we have any, we're getting carbon in? And I said, why aren't we trying to get TGVs? And I always forget what that means, but it's people who, it's targeted vendors, minority vendors, I forget the exact term. And the person told me, well, you know, when we were building the building, we had a black carpet company, and the carpet came up. And I said, when the building was built? And they said something like 25 years. I said, well, the carpet would have come up anyway. 25 years. You know, how much you want out of this, Mr. I mean, how much you paid for this? You got 25 years and you still talking about it. That seems like a pretty good deal. But by the way, it's a true story. I'm not making it, it's a true story. It's because of stereotypes that we have in this country. It's because of, you know, if you get 25 years out of carpet in a public building, you've done well. You've done well, huh? You've done well. So the reason I'm saying these kinds of things is because that really does impact. Don't think that those stereotypes just impact your social life. It impacts how you treat people. If for me, I'm very much aware that whenever I teach, that I need to see each student as an individual. I need to hear each student. I remember one time I accepted a late paper from a female. I had a rule that I decided if you take the late paper, I took it from a female but not from a male. And I explained to the male was on me. But when I explained to the male that the female had a miscarriage and he didn't, he got it. You know what I'm saying? So we have to be very careful and very much in touch with our biases. You know, I'm going to close by saying this. The tragedy for this country is that we're the most diverse country in the world. That's it. We are the most diverse country in this world. And I make them really mad by saying, we are not, and don't get offended, but you know I can go home any day. We are not going to stop immigrants from coming over here any more than the American Indians stopped us. So get over it, huh? You know, we can do all our pontificating, we can do all our closing the borders, we could build a fence from here to thy kingdom come, but history is on immigrants' side. If you know anything about history, the walls of China didn't stop them. The walls of Rome didn't stop them. If you're from Africa, the Bantu started on the east coast of Africa and came right on around and ended up in South Africa. You know, am I right? Came right on around and ended up in, and so you have Bantu languages spreading all across Africa. So it's not going to happen. Now, I'm not saying we don't have to organize it. We don't have to, you know, I'm not saying, but we have to learn to live with diversity. We have to learn to live and take advantage. So the real tragedy is if we fight diversity rather than embracing diversity, huh? Is if we fight diversity rather than embracing diversity. Because there's a richness. As a teacher, which is what I see myself as doing, I didn't want all students agreeing with everything I said. First of all, because they were probably dumb if they all agreed with everything. They weren't thinking. They weren't owning. They weren't trying to think for themselves, which is the ultimate role of education, huh? Which is the ultimate goal of education. Not to think like me, but to think. You know, to think creatively. So, my brothers, we have made some contributions in this world. We've made some contributions in this country, as has all people. I use my father because my father was not perfect. He wasn't perfect. You know, people where I work love to say on Martin Luther King Day, yeah, but you know, he had an affair. And since I can read, I say, yeah, and Jefferson raped his slaves. Because if you're a slave, you can't give consent. So we all I could go further, but I'm trying to be nice today. We all have strengths and weaknesses. We all have positive. But if you leave with anything today, I want you to leave knowing that there are some brothers, that most brothers are outside doing the best they can with what they have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Harris. I know everybody has to get back to work, and we're coming to the end of the lunch hour. We have just a couple of announcements. And first, I'd like to ask Mr. Michael Johnson from our own Human Rights and Equal Economic Opportunity Department to share with us a little bit about the African Americans in Aviation event coming up on February 29th.
My name is Mike Johnson with the Office of Human Rights and Equal Economic Opportunity here with St. Paul. But I'd just like to take a moment to tell you about an event that's coming up about African Americans in aviation. I'm also a licensed pilot, and I appreciate how Dr. Whitney talked about stories from his father and how the knowledge of black history is passed along. I'll just tell a quick story about my father and how I got interested in aviation and came to be a licensed pilot. My dad was in the Air Force. He was one of 13 kids, grew up down in Vicksburg, Mississippi, and our family ended up moving here to Minnesota when he got a promotion with Northwest Airlines. He was a auto mechanic, and through the Air Force was trained as a airplane mechanic. But I asked him recently if he had ever heard of the Tuskegee Airmen when he was going into the Air Force. I had grown up always knowing about the Tuskegee Airmen with my dad in the Air Force, and he would always tell us that story, and we always knew that story. We saw the movies coming up, first one on HBO several years ago, and now most recently with the Red Tails. It's becoming very popular, but my dad had never heard of him when he was in the Air Force. The recruiter came to the school trying to get people into the military, and they told him, what does he think he wants to do? And he said he was working on cars, so he just said, well, why don't you check the box that says airplane? And he was trained as an aircraft mechanic, served in the Vietnam War, working on F-4 Phantoms, and he came back and he was offered a job with Delta Airlines, and they flew him over here for training. He was passing through, I think, the Detroit airport, and they offered the Northwest Airlines had their big booth set up, and they offered him a job, and the next week he was hired on with Northwest as a mechanic. But while he was over there, they offered discount training for pilots, and he was, as a mechanic, he wanted to take some flight training, and he was denied the opportunity to train as a pilot while he was in the military. They told him since he had a loose muscle in his eye, he couldn't do it. So when he got out, he used his mechanic skills, talking about doing the best you can with what you have. He built his own airplane and was trained as a pilot, and he flew that plane. So his story has inspired me, and I continued on to get my license. But the stories that we're sharing in our program about African Americans in aviation, we have original Tuskegee Airman Major Joe Gomer. He was a fighter pilot back in World War II. If you're not familiar with the Tuskegee Airmen, they were the first African American aviators in the U.S. Military. They fought through discrimination, and through their training and everything, came to be well known for their exceptional service, and opened up the door for African Americans in the military. But with our event coming up on the 29th at the Minnesota History Center, we'll have Major Joe Gomer, Tuskegee Airman pilot from Duluth. We'll also have Mr. Woody Fountain. He was the first black airline pilot for Northwest Airlines. and also Mamie Singleton, who is the executive director for a youth training program for aviation. I also assist there teaching the ground school for that program. But I hope that you can come out and hear some more stories directly from some real pioneers in aviation history so they can share their stories. It'll be an interesting event. I hope that you can join us. Thank you.